No. Are we good? Can we hear me now?
I'm truly stalling for time a little bit here while we wait for the last few people in the back to get drinks. But while I'm stalling for time, I also want to thank the many familiar faces that I see here today. It's very exciting to see people come back and still like us. So thank you. We try to keep it fresh and interesting for y'all. My name is Patty. I'm the founder and executive director of Chicago for Chicagoans. We started this organization. I started this organization 7 years ago. We have been doing lectures at Room 13 for 6 of those years. The first year I tried to do winter tours in blizzards, and it was really fun, but then I found a venue that was inside. So now we do this. So if you guys come to the lecture series and you have a good time, you should check out our walking tours in the summer. Many of our guides are here tonight. Many of our lecturers also give walking tours, and we're all a bunch of like fun, cool people. And I don't really police the content of my tour guides, so they are very opinionated and very fun. That being said, it's not like I just let them say anything. I'm like, okay, we do some tests. We're like, how big of a nerd are you? Tell me your favorite archive. And any true qualified person is like, well, personally, I like the Chicago Tribune archives because of the digitization. Yeah, right? And then that person is probably going to do a really good job. Anyway, but our qualifications are, purposefully we try not to be gatekeepers. Many of our speakers were not professional speakers, were not professional tour guides before they started working with our organization. We provide all the training you need. So if you see people sitting up here and you think it sounds fun and you think it sounds cool, don't be shy. Come up, tell me you want to give a tour, and we'll get you trained. We'll make sure that you know what you're doing, that you feel confident and you feel supported, because we want every Chicagoan to be a tour guide. That's kind of our whole jam. Yeah. The other thing we always want people to be able to attend our events regardless of their financial status. So since the very beginning, all of our public events have been offered on a pay-what-you-can basis. And that's because every Chicagoan deserves to learn about the history of their own city regardless of their income level. That being said, if you're feeling a little flushed tonight, maybe you had a few extra cocktails, or maybe you just got a cool bonus at work, you should think about donating to our organization. We have so many ways you can donate. We accept cash, we accept check, we accept credit cards, we take Venmo, we take Google Pay. I could probably figure out Apple Pay if you give me some time.
Venmo.
The only thing we no longer take is firstborn babies. They're very expensive and hard to get rid of. But we do take gold coins and other major forms of pirate currency. But yeah, nonprofits, small nonprofits especially like ours, really depend on income from participants like you, so we do appreciate anything you're able to contribute. All right, well, we've really gotten through most of the bar line, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into my introductions here. Our speakeasy series this year is called Gone But Not Forgotten. So all of our speakers have been addressing things that were once very, very prominent in Chicago history, but are virtually erased from the city streets today. We've had a lot of incredible lectures. It's almost Valentine's Day, so I thought, what better way to celebrate almost Valentine's Day than to talk about the history of sex work in brothels in Chicago.
Yeah.
Now, I imagine Mandy, our fabulous speaker tonight, is probably going to give you some disclaimer about how sex work is real work. That's not just her opinion. We also believe that. So we are going to be talking very frankly about sex work, about women working in this profession. So if that's going to be difficult for you to hear, hey, you didn't pay anything to get in the door. So you can walk right back out of it. But Mandy has done an incredible amount of research on this. If you don't know Mandy Crypt, as she goes on the internet, she's an incredible historian. She gives really fantastic tours of the Art Institute. She leads student groups all over the country, so I'm in awe of her. I deal with adult Chicagoans. She deals with hellions from Springfield, Illinois, who are 10 years old. So she's truly top tier tour guide. But she's an incredible lecturer. She has done so many great lectures for us over the years. Even though she lives in Wisconsin, we still let her do stuff for us. She spends enough time here, we count it. And I guess, she does, have roots in the area or whatever. Still a lot of family that lives here. Ooh, Someone's calling me. Sorry. Anyway, hey, if you run a nonprofit, people just call your personal cell
sorry,
phone.
someone is still getting a drink here. Yeah.
All right, so without further ado, I would very much like to hand it over to Mandy. Please give her a nice, warm welcome, and remember, guys, tip your bartenders.
Hell yeah. Woo! Ooh.
Let's get her in there.
Hello.
Just adjust that.
All right, can everybody hear me this way? We all good? Hey, we're good? Cool. All right, so let me move just a little bit that way. It's right in my face.
Yeah.
There we go. All right, so as Patty has mentioned, I'm going to be giving a disclaimer today. We're going to be talking about sex. And if you've ever seen a titty before in your life, you should be supporting sex workers, because sex work, A, is real work, and B, it is hard work and it is dangerous work. If you are ever going to discuss it, please know that we should be listening to the sex workers, not legislators. Listen to sex workers, ask them what they need. There's your disclaimer. If you're clutching pearls at this point, please log off or leave. All right, so we are going to be starting with a very brief history on prostitution itself. We have some printouts, and I think there is a QR code somewhere if you do not have a printout accessed to you. And I'll let you know when we're going to be looking at pictures. So, brothels is just another word for a place where you can go and you can mingle with sex workers. Other words for it are bordello, ranch, whorehouse, den of sin, house of ill repute, and molly house if you are a gay man. Sex workers go by many names as well: prostitute, whore, hooker, fallen woman, courtesan, escort, harlot. Harlot's one of my favorites. So if you read any of these things, chances are you're talking about a place where you can procure sex. The earliest recorded instance that we found so far of what we would consider to be prostitution today actually has been recorded in 2400 BCE, before the Common Era. And this was actually a sacred prostitution account in Samaria. A temple brothel, which would do sacred prostitution, means that you are a person who is working under a particular deity, and the sex acts that you perform are in exchange for some kind of blessing. And this is the earliest form that we've been able to find of prostitution. And there were different grades of a sacred prostitute. You could have, you know, the most respected ones. These are the ones who work inside the temple, don't go anywhere else, and they are specifically for very high-ranking people to come and visit. And then you had temple prostitutes that anybody could visit, and then you had streetwalkers. So there were different grades. As you may have guessed at this point, a streetwalker is definitely on the lower end of this particular food chain. There is a picture on the first page there. That first picture of the goddess there is Ishtar, and that's the goddess that this particular temple brothel was attached to. Now, depending on culture, you could have sacred prostitution for, you know, pretty much every temple, or it's just a specific set amount of deities. But there were some cultures that didn't use it at all. But most of what we know comes from like the Middle East, the cradle of mankind and whatnot. We didn't really see prostitution pop up in this fashion until many, many years later. And there's even some early cultures that didn't have any kind of prostitution whatsoever. So pretty interesting to note. And I'll get to this later, but is not the world's oldest profession, as has been previously attributed. Now, there's been evidence of prostitution, sacred prostitution around the world, including Greece, Rome, India, China, and Japan. And then there have been laws that are dictating how prostitutes could interact with the rest of the world as early as 1780 BCE with Hammurabi's Code. For those of you who might have gone and listened in your social study class in about 7th grade, you know Hammurabi's Code is one of the earliest code books and law books that people kind of work off of when they were building their law in their new cities. So Hammurabi's Code actually had 6 different laws that mentioned the rights of prostitutes and their children. So it was clearly a big enough industry, and enough children were being produced from this industry that it needed to be regulated in some form. Now, these laws are pretty like neutral as far as like if they are in favor for or against sex workers, pretty neutral. But by 1075 BCE, we get the Code of Asura. And this is one of the first times where we see prostitution actually getting demonized and looked down upon as a dirty form of work. In 1075 BCE, the Code of Asura dictates that prostitutes now must distinguish themselves from other women by the type of clothing that they wear. And in this case, they are not allowed to go veiled. As a respectable woman, you are allowed to go walking around outside, but you have to have a veil on. And if you are a prostitute, obviously you're not a respectable woman, so you don't get that veil. And the same went for their children as well. If you had produced a female offspring, they would not get to wear one as well. The second picture there is a picture from ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, prostitutes were called pornai, and pimps, the people who would pimp them out, were called pornobaskos. And men or women could actually hold this title. They could be pimps no matter what your sex was, but you had to be a Greek citizen. That was the only stipulation. And it was actually a legitimate business. It was seen as a business that, like, no one's going to try and bring it up as, like, part of blackmail that you own a brothel. However, it's not a respectable business. So if you were somebody who was higher up in society and you had a brothel, you best have another form of income to make you seem respectable. If sex was your only business, you're not seen as super respectable, but you are seen as legitimate. Most prostitutes at this point in Greece are enslaved women or abandoned by their family. And in this case, it's actually abandoned by the head of the family, the father of the family, because women don't matter in Greek or Roman society at this point. So if you are abandoned by your family, you can be picked up by a brothel and trained from early childhood to be a prostitute for the rest of your life. And that's basically all you have to look forward to, because in Greece and in Rome, women who were prostitutes were not allowed to legally marry. And through different periods, they weren't even considered citizens. So if you landed yourself in this position, you were, no better than dirt for a lot of people. So not a good place to be. By 594 BCE, we have the Athenian lawmaker, his name's Solon. He actually started regulating it for Greek citizens, and he made it affordable. Prostitution was regulated by prices. He made dictations on public health and safety, and most of them had to do with people. Who's got their phone? It's all right. But yeah, so Solon was making dictations on, like, what you could charge for each sex act, who could come to those brothels, and also talking about, like, if a sex worker had showed up and she has some kind of venereal disease, it's on the bordello or the brothel to remove her from that position. So now you're probably wondering, what would this cost you for a basic sex act? Well, I'll tell you. Especially state-run brothels, because there were state-run brothels in Greece at this point, and particularly Athens. Athens did a lot of documenting on their bordellos. For working classes, you would start with 1 obolus, which is about 1/6 of a drachma, which is your daily wage. So it was a very affordable price for anybody to go and get their whistle wet. Now, women were really the only ones who were prostitutes at this point. Men are not allowed to be prostitutes in Greek society unless you are under the age of 12. I know. Yeah. There was a big thing about how if you are, the age of a man, you shouldn't be prostituting, but little boys is okay. We don't believe that now. Want to make that very clear. Young boys are technically okay. And if you were caught as an adult man being a prostitute, there were some heavy consequences, which would have included exile and castration. So super fun. And in Greek society, just like most other societies, there are different classes or different areas where you could consider yourself a prostitute. There are independents, people who just worked for themselves. Musicians, dancers, and actresses were also a class of prostitute. It was actually assumed that with the price of your other services, you would be willing to perform sexual services, as part of your job. You would have enslaved people who were on the lowest rung, people who were not even considered citizens or real people. And then you had the high-class escorts, hetera or heterai. These women are the only women in Greek society who are allowed to handle money. So that's a big deal. If you want to be considered a free woman who is independent of a man, who is able to make her own way, but you don't really care so much if you're respected or not, Hetera is a good place to go. And these women are very well trained. They are trained in conversation, they're trained in music, dancing, literature, and politics at the time, because these are the women who are going after like the politicians. They're going after the big businessmen, the money makers. And these are women who can have long-term financial and romantic relationships with these people, and it's not actually considered taboo at this point if you have a hetera. However, it doesn't actually save you from any kind of discomfort or any kind of risk, because you have no rights against abuse. There were multiple records that I read where hetera in particular, and remember, this is the high-end escort, complaining that their patrons were forcing oral sex on them, which they considered super taboo and icky, and also anal sex, which they considered super taboo and icky. So, but they couldn't really go to the officials about this because, well, you chose to do this job is how they looked at it. So even if you're on the higher end of society, this is not a good place to be. There's another picture, next page. Prostitutes mostly seen as a necessity, and brothels are placed near barracks. This is super common with most cultures, most cities, most big empires. And it's actually something that I've seen as a uniting thread. No matter how well or how badly prostitutes have been treated in the past, most people had considered it a necessary evil. Even though they looked down on these, women, mostly women, there were a few cases where men were allowed to be prostitutes, but mostly women held this job. And even though they considered this to be something that would prevent things like homosexuality and rape of, good, upstanding women, and dear God, it would help to keep you away from sodomy of any sex. They considered it to be, a thankless job. They were not going to thank you for your service for this. And for most of ancient history, you had prostitutes being enslaved people. So these are, women who were initially good, upstanding women in the eyes of most societies, but they just happened to be conquered, bought, or sold by somebody and ended up in this setting. So you can imagine, like, you just going about your daily business and suddenly some asshat comes in, takes over your country, and just rounds up a bunch of pretty looking women in your neighborhood, and suddenly you are a prostitute and you no longer matter. So even though we're seeing it as a necessary evil, we're not treating people as people. Now if we're talking about Roman society, this is fun. So Roman society, it was a little bit easier for people to go out and be a prostitute. There was a little less persecution. But what's fun about this is that you had to be registered in order to be a prostitute in the Roman Empire. A registered Roman prostitute would be called a meretrix, and she would have to actually go to her city hall. She'd have to put her name down in a book, and then this barred her from getting married or all these other things that we expect out of a citizen. But she wasn't really persecuted openly in public, unless you decided to not register, in which case you were expelled from the empire, which is super fun. Prostitution was legal throughout the entire Roman Empire, right up until about the end, right when we get Constantine. Constantine is where things start to wobble a little bit when it came to prostitution. And it was, just like Greece, a regulated and legal industry. And fun fact, Caligula was actually the first person to institute this registration process of prostitutes. And the first one to make it a somewhat legitimate profession and not just something looked down upon in dirty alleys. And he imposed, like all emperors do, an imperial tax on it. First one to do that. Now, this also means that there were because it was not as looked down upon in Rome as it was in Greece, you had some high-ranking Roman prostitutes dictating fashion for the upper crust ladies. They would wear their hair in a certain way, and their husband might talk about it oh, so-and-so had this wonderful hair, or they had this beautiful set of jewelry, and next day you know, wifey's got a new hairdo and a new color of dress. So even if people are kind of sneering at you, they're dictating how people are behaving in society, which I thought was really interesting. Now we fast forward a little bit to the Byzantine Empire, 438 CE, Common Era. We have the Codex of Theodosianus, and he revoked all rights of parents to compel their daughters into slavery, prostitution. So before this point, if you were in a Christian nation, it was perfectly acceptable for your parents to decide, I'm not going to be raising another girl, and just sell you to a brothel. No questions asked. You could also sell yourself into prostitution if you wanted. If you were trying to pay off debts, you could sell yourself into prostitution and, in theory, work your way out. That never worked out well for you because brothels would impose things like fees for your room and board, your clothes, things like that. If you ever had to see a doctor, that would be imposed on you. So people rarely bought themselves out of slavery in this case. But yeah, if you didn't want to hang out with your daughter, if you didn't want to raise her, you could sell her into prostitution. Well, in 438 CE, that ended. And this is the Christianization of prostitution. And what I mean by that is we are now moving away from, well, it's a necessary evil. We don't necessarily like it, but I suppose we'll hang on to it, to, oh my God, you are an immoral person. You're going to drag down everybody else with you. You're going to bring us all into hell by being a harlot. That's really the beginning of this. So thank you, the Byzantine era. Now, 600 BCE, we're going to roll back just a little bit because I was all over the place with my notes. 600 BCE, we have the Quanzhong. He was a high official in ancient China, and he's the first person to regulate brothels for the first time in China, allowing for an increased state income, and he also issued permits. He was taking from the ancients there, and he was the first one in China to really see that this could be a lucrative business for the state, and he's the one who implemented state-run prostitution in China. So what an icon. This is also one of the first cases that we see of a red light district. He was the one to really impose a separation of good, upstanding citizens from the filth of the streets. So, and these red light districts didn't have just prostitution. They were pretty seedy bars. They were gambling dens, places where you could go and do drugs, all kinds of fun stuff. And these were considered legitimate businesses then. And this is also where we see the word courtesan first appear in this era. Whenever you hear the word courtesan, you think of, oh, this lovely person who's very well educated, who's very graceful and elegant. She just happens to blow people for a living. That is where this starts. You start having high-class prostitutes named courtesans, catering to the higher up officials in court, and you also have them in the harems of the various emperors and kings of China. And this actually was so popular in China that Korea and Japan started doing it as well, and they have their own words for courtesans, but it started in China first in that point. Now, rolling forward again a little bit, 320 CE, Emperor Constantine ends sacred prostitution entirely. This was the last dregs of paganism in his empire. You still had a few temples going on. You still had people who were really interested in like hanging on to the old ways. And Constantine was like, nope, I want a battle so you don't get to have your gods anymore. And he destroyed pretty much every pagan temple he could, and this led to the sacred prostitution having no place to be, and this was one of the last really respectable ways to be a prostitute. So you now have people who are struggling to maintain a living because once people learn you've been a prostitute, no matter if you were sacred or not, no one wants to hire you and no one's going to marry you. So this caused a huge problem in Constantine's era. This is also leading to more demonizing of sex work and of prostitutes in general. Skipping ahead a little bit, we come to our next picture. I don't remember what it is, but flip the page, there's a picture. We're now in the medieval era. We've skipped a whole bunch of time because we don't have all night. And now after the collapse of the Roman and Byzantine empires, there was a new campaign to end slavery of all kinds, including sexual slavery. But this also, for some reason, made prostitution a booming business again, because anytime you try to block something, there becomes a black market for it. So when people are going, oh, well, if I can't just like buy free people or like, free workers, and I don't have to, I don't have to worry about enslavement, I can just keep them here for really low wages. And so prostitution becomes like a booming enterprise, but it's also kind of like down low. It depends on what part of the medieval era you're talking about, but it becomes a pretty big market after that throughout Europe. And One common thread through history, as I mentioned, necessary evil. People believed that men in particular needed to have access to sex at all times, but women shouldn't, because women are wilting flowers. Women aren't sexual at all. In fact, for a large part of history, people believed that women were asexual and that they just needed to be, accessible and available and cordial. They were not supposed to be engaging in sex. So you're supposed to lay there and just think of England. Which is why a lot of men actually went to prostitutes, because, you did your husbandly duties at home, you made your kids, and you left your wife alone. And then you went to, Bessie down the street at the local brothel and you had a good time. Because prostitutes were seen as stand-ins for wives. They felt like if you were having sex for funsies with your wife, you were sullying her. And so why would you do that to your wife, I'm sorry, I'm looking right at you, sir, but why would you do that to your wife?
I'm not married.
See, anyway, so people believed if you sullied your wife for pleasure, that you were going to turn her into a wanton woman. She was going to leave you and you're going to be a cuckold, or you were going to turn her into a very sinful woman who's never going to get into heaven. So go sully the prostitute down the street. And as I mentioned, this was seen as a bigger deterrent from things like homosexual behavior. Masturbation was also a big one. Masturbation was right up there with sodomy for a lot of people for some reason. And if you are on my Patreon, you'll know that I talked about this with Kellogg. People got some weird ideas on masturbation. And at this point, we're now in the medieval era, Christianity actually made it a huge crusade against immoral activity, prostitution being a really big one. And next to that, unapproved sexual acts between married consenting couples. And these not approved acts could range anywhere from, reverse cowgirl or doing it in the butt. They were equally as bad in the eyes of the Catholic Church. If you're not doing it missionary with the lights off to make a kid, you're doing it wrong, apparently. I wouldn't know what that's about. Now, prostitution saw various periods of tolerance and encouragement, and then also periods of persecution, depending on who was ruling at the time and the political environment. So, if things are doing okay, and, you don't really have a whole lot of bigger issues to worry about, people were really hitting hard on the prostitutes because, they're going to drag us all into hell. But if there's war going on and you've got bigger things to worry about, people are like, shh, don't worry about it. There's a brothel next to the barracks. Go, enjoy yourself. It was kind of an on-again, off-again relationship with persecution. The 11th and 12th centuries, we see prostitution becoming widely regulated across Europe entirely. In the 14th and 15th centuries, many countries still had state-run brothels owned by the government. So they would dictate whatever prices you were getting, what acts you could afford. They were the ones who moved various prostitutes around because, you got to keep your inventory fresh, right? So there was actually a huge exchange program between different state-run brothels, and they would merry-go-round these girls to various brothels. Girls rarely, once they were put into the system of prostitution, ever saw their hometowns again because they were shunted around to different areas. Now, in the Renaissance era, we start seeing these European courts frequently having courtesans who are specially trained, just like the courtesans in China, to entertain and, be flirty, be fun, be friendly, and then go suck a dick later. And this was actually seen as a pretty, you weren't super well respected, but people were like, all right, I get it. And they weren't persecuting you too hard because, in every other way, you're a respectable person. There's a great, I think it was called Dangerous Love. It's great movie, great example of Italian courtesans. In Venice, and I actually got to go to Venice. So I watched it in Venice. So as I was watching the movie, I'm like, oh, I was there. I got a biscuit there. It was great.
That's awesome.
Sorry?
Is it a new term?
Yeah, right. Ask me later. My husband doesn't care.
Women age out of it.
That is a good question. So I was actually going to touch on this later, but when women aged out of prostitution, you could, now at least in the United States, I didn't really see too many like concrete answers for this for most of like pre-19th century, but you saw prostitutes as young as 12 and as old as 50. So that's a really big range. The biggest average was like in the early to mid 20s. And if you managed to not get some kind of nasty disease or beat up by your John, you could do prostitution for a good 10 to 15 years before you're considered old news. So it really depends on when you got into the game and how you did during the game. But good question. Now by this point, red light districts are super common to have in every city. There's something that is just, if you want a good time, ask where Storyville is. And districts have, once they're made, they keep getting descended on by Christians who want to fix everybody and would do all kinds of crusades in these red light districts. It doesn't matter what time period you're in, what country you're in. Once a red light district has been made, there is going to be a Christian with a banner telling you you're going to hell. It's great. Yeah, so that's fun. Now, many laws during this point, we're now medieval, Renaissance, and after, many laws were put on the books in various countries that would actually disenfranchise sex workers. So it meant that you couldn't go and complain to, the burgermeister that, your brothel owner was stealing all of your money, not feeding you, and also letting Johns beat you up, because they're like, well, that's not my problem. Boo, right? So there were a lot of laws like that, or saying like you couldn't choose which brothel you worked in, or you didn't get to dictate how much of your pay, from these Johns was given to you versus given to the house. There were no regulations on how much you could charge your brothel workers for their room and board, for their clothing, for their doctoring, for toileting, anything like that. And by toileting, I mean your perfumes and whatnot. Because that was actually a standard and expected purchase. If you were a decent brothel, you would pay for nice things like perfume for your girls so they didn't constantly smell like jizz. No, I told you we were getting real. Now, and sex workers were often subjected to, I make jokes because it's a deeply unfortunate situation, and if I don't, I'm gonna scream. So sex workers are often subjugated to degrading and dehumanizing exams in the name of public health. So I'm not saying like, oh, you went to your doctor and he checked you out to make sure you were safe. He would poke and prod every crevice of you looking for something to demonize you with. And also important to note that until we get to the 20th century, unless you were a midwife, there were no women doctors. There are no women medical professionals. You could be a nurse, but you aren't the one doing the exam if you're a nurse. And if you're a midwife, maybe you notice syphilis on somebody's junk, but you also can't diagnose it because you're not a doctor. So these are men who are already predisposed to not liking you, and they are doing exams as a way to punish you. So it's not as nice as it sounds, like, oh yeah, no, you get exams from a doctor once in a while. No, it's dehumanizing, it's mean. Now, fast forwarding a little bit now to the Victorian era, like I said, we're skipping big chunks here. 1898, Rudyard Kipling, the guy who wrote the Jungle Book, he coins the phrase, the world's oldest profession, in his short story On the City Wall, talking about a barracks. And so that's where he coins that phrase. And I actually was talking with somebody earlier today about how, the oldest phrase, or the phrase, the oldest profession in the world is actually inaccurate. There are people who actually argue that midwifery is the first profession, because there have always been babies, there's always been people coming to this world, but not every culture had prostitution. So I thought that was a fun little tidbit. Now it's fantastic. Doing great on time. That means that you guys will have time for questions later. Now, prostitution and sex work in the 19th and 21st centuries have seen even more dehumanizing and demonizing because of religion. And I'm not talking just Christians, we're talking a lot of religions have made it a point to make you feel bad if you have sex for fun or money. And it's gotten even worse since we've now... Yeah.
This is my service.
Hell yeah. Love ya. Fantastic. So, a lot of people who like to dictate and regulate people's lives have made it their mission to try and root out sex work because they think it's a social evil. and that people who are doing it don't know any better and are just clearly victims, victimizing other people. That is not the case for everybody. We'll talk about more of that later. But this starts us on our journey into talking about Chicago prostitution. Now, in U.S. law, prostitution was tolerated and legal in most of this country from the very beginning. Now, we had certain areas where, like places like Massachusetts, that didn't allow prostitution, but most of the colonies, they accepted it as a standard part of business. But they would have restrictions based on like what races could work, how long you could work, what types of acts you could work, and what you could charge. Brothels for the United States, most of them were kind of small, 5 to 20 women, or you'd have a lot of independents working out of their own homes, out of their own apartments. Larger brothels come in like the mid-19th century. Sex workers at this point come from all walks of life. Americans, despite being Puritan in origin, we've been really freaky. We've had some doozies here. And from the beginning of our country, we've had prostitutes who were, very high-bred, very well-educated, had money. They just decided to do it for funsies with, so-and-so's husbands. You also had people who were of the middle class who needed to make a little extra money, and sex work is a very easy way to make money because, sex sells and people are always going to buy it. And then you had people on the bottom rung who were doing it out of desperation, who had no other form of income coming in. And again, it is an easy thing to sell because it doesn't matter what you look like, somebody's going to buy it. And then you had everybody in between. You had people of all class, all races, and ages from like 12 to 50 doing this type of work. A lot of women actually saw it as a way to escape bad marriages. They saw it as a way to escape toxic families because, again, these are some of the few women in our society who could actually handle money legally. If you were a prostitute, you could have control over all of your money because you clearly were not, having a male chaperone to take care of you. So you could have a bank account. You could have a bank account. You could have an accountant, especially if you were good at what you did and you made good money. And you had the same risks and dangers applied, though. You had, the same types of Johns who want to beat up their prostitutes. You have the same type of brothel owners who want to steal all your money. You have the same kind of doctors who are poking and prodding, trying to find something wrong with you and ascribe it to moral degradation. And you still had people who thought you were lower than dirt, even though you're sleeping with their husbands and taking your mortgage check. Now, most brothels, though, in the United States were run by madams, not men. In Europe, it was the other way around, up until about 18th, 19th century. Most brothels in Europe before that point run by men because, again, men are the only ones who are allowed to handle money unless you were an independent, in which case you could handle your own money. But brothels in the United States almost always were handled by women who had worked their way up the ladder. They started out as prostitutes, they got really good at it, they got trustworthy with the madams, and then they bought the house out from under the madams. Or they were inheriting it. Or if you had enough collateral and you could start your own place, you bought your own place. So that is very empowering for a lot of women who didn't want to go into a bad marriage and wanted to have the ability to have their own muscle in their own house, kicking out the garbage. That's a pretty attractive offer, right? Right? Yeah. Now, a lot of people consider this a legit business, but still kind of a shady business, as, a lot of people think today, as a lot of people thought then. A lot of mixed reviews on whether or not prostitution should be legal or not. But prostitution became a staple, not only in the East Coast where we started out, but in the push west. So imagine you're a miner or a railroad worker, and you're put out into this company town in the middle of bumblefuck nowhere, and you've got nothing to do after work but go to the bar or go home to sleep. What's going to attract you? Not just the money and the freedom of travel. What's going to attract you? Food and sex. So a lot of the brothels would actually have kitchens, and they would make food and bring you in that way. And then, little Lila's going to sit on your lap and she's going to take you upstairs for $50. That was a big draw for a lot of these people to come into mining towns, railroad towns, and other small settlements as we pushed westward. And we would not have this, the broad expanse of this country today, for better or worse, without prostitutes, without sex work. And this was also one of the few places where women could actually, get employment and be seen as like a self-made person. I'm going to hold all questions to the end. So now enter Chicago. We were never a formally legalized prostitution city, meaning that if you kept your house clean and you kept the noise down, people aren't going to bug you as much, but it's strictly speaking not legal. It was sort of a gray area in the legalities. But again, most people considered it a necessary evil. Establishments were encouraged to be discreet and undisruptive to the local community, and they were also expected to bribe officials in order to keep their doors open. We're Crook County it's Chicago. It's Crook County for a reason. You grease a few palms, you can do whatever you want. Exactly. So now we're getting into the post-Civil War era. Chicago's been a city for a while. We've had our vice districts. We've had our push westward. We've been our, Wild Wild West town. We're now becoming a big city. We are now seeing more women entering the workforce out of necessity. Everybody knew a husband, a father, a son, a cousin who had died in the war. There's a lot of people who died, in the hundreds of thousands of people. And so there were a lot of jobs left on the table. And this was the first time in U.S. history where we saw a big push for women entering the workforce without any kind of stigma, because people knew what people had lost. What this means, though, for Chicago is that for the first time, we see a lot of white women entering prostitution. You might ask yourself, why? Just ask me why. Why? Thank you for playing along. Why? So the reason is that a lot of racist assholes thought it was a really nice thing to have a black servant, because it was kind of hearkening back to those house slave days. It was fashionable to have black women doing your laundry, cooking your food, taking care of your kids, because it's hearkening back to a simple time. What this meant is that white women weren't able to get domestic work as easily as they had before. So you had fewer black women going into prostitution and more white women going into prostitution. This was a lot of people were seeing this and going, oh my God, the morals. They were freaking out because now white women have to endure what black women were enduring before, the Civil War ended. White women became prostitutes because they had to. Now, this wasn't to say that there weren't black prostitutes. There were. And there were a lot of people who treated them as novelties and still only paying like dirt cheap prices to do it. In Chicago, like one of the cheapest brothels you could go to was a black-owned brothel for 25 cents. So, yeah. Which is equivalent to like, I think $5 today, something like that. It's a really low price. And white women could get a bigger price, regardless of what station you were at beforehand. But women of all classes and of all ages at this point, again, found, oh, this is an easy way to, fill our financial gap and feed my kids when, dad's been put in the ground during the Civil War. Now, fast forward a little bit. There's another picture there. I don't know which page we're on now, but there's another picture. October 8, 1871, what happened? Fire. Yeah, Chicago Fire. Chicago Fire wipes out all of our original vice districts, which were downtown. We had something like 17,000 buildings, like four something square miles destroyed. So our original vice district was in that far zone, and they had to set up shop somewhere else. In the rebuild, they decided to go to the Levee district, which is on the far south end of Chicago, far south end of the Loop. And this was... this became our vice district for the next century. Not quite a century, close enough. But we were quite proud of our vice district. We actually ended up in travel logs and guidebooks. The Levee district was a major tourist attraction on par with places like Storyville and New Orleans. In fact, people were actually... Chicagoans were very proud that we had such a prominent vice district. The district gets its name, or the Levee district gets its name from the fact that it's near the ports. It's near where the river docks are and where the lake docks are. So, you have a very constant, steady stream of people coming in and out. It's a great place. And then this is in the First Ward. So you might have heard of the First Ward Ball. Big party, big to-do. Yay, prostitutes were there as well. But that first ward in the Levee District, that is mainly where prostitutes set up shop. And they would do it right alongside gambling parlors and other saloons where you could, cash your whole check and then drink it away the next afternoon. 1880 to 1912, this was our most prominent years for, I guess, like gray area legalized prostitution, since we never formally legalized it. Sorry, I'm kind of talking over some of my notes. These places in this area, in the Levee District, these were some of the grubbiest and hardest places to work. There is a page where I think we have 2 pages here that have maps. That tells you where these places are, the names of some of these clubs, the names of the streets, and it gives you an idea of how packed in these dens of sin are. The ones in red are all the brothels. So that tells you how popular it was here. And these streets had, some pretty nasty names like Bedbug Row. Yeah. And then you had a bar called Bucket of Blood, which was named after how many fights they got into and how much blood was spilled on a daily basis. They just named their bar that. So when you have a brothel in this area, you're not getting the high-end escorts. You're not getting the highly trained courtesans. You are getting people who either put themselves there because of desperation, were kind of tricked into the life saying, oh yeah, no, it's an easy way to make money, and then they get swallowed up by the madams and by the brothel owners because they can't buy their way out of this lifestyle. And then you have people who were directly kidnapped and brought into what they called white slavery or sex slavery. That's the type of area we're talking about here. This was not in the Loop. This was south of the Loop.
Oh, the south side?
Yeah, so somewhere between the south end of the Loop and Bronzeville. Is that?
Okay.
Yeah. If you are looking at a map, that's about where it's at. Now, I'm going to give you a little rundown of some of our more infamous establishments and figures from this time. There are pictures of some of these people. We had Little Greenhouse on Begbud Row. This was one of the places where you could get a 25-cent African-American prostitute. You could get peep shows for teen boys and an apothecary that sold cocaine, morphine, and heroin. Right? It's a one-stop shop. You had the Bucket of Blood Saloon, known for its violent riots. You had Vic Shaw. Now, Vic Shaw owned a place called Vic Shaw's. She was the madam of this place, and she ran a very unhealthy, in my opinion, house of ill repute. She was very mean to the girls who worked with her or worked for her. She didn't care about whether or not they had any kind of diseases or not. She didn't care about if their johns, beat them up. All she cared about was keeping the doors open. She was also known for human trafficking. And she was located on Dearborn in that Levee District. You had John Mushmouth Johnson, who was the first black vice lord in Chicago, who had a saloon on State Street called the Silver Dollar. You had Freiberg's Dance Hall, which was owned by Ike Bloom, and he had one of the longer lasting brothels. He used this as a cover, called it a dance academy and a dance hall. And he did actually have it outfitted as such. The whole inside, that whole first floor, was a dance hall, complete with concessions and bars. And then the girls who were walking around doing the dancing would ask if you'd like extra services and bring you upstairs to one of the tiny rooms upstairs and show you an even better time. This place did not close until 1914. He employed a full orchestra and was a human trafficker as well, so don't give him too much credit. But that finally closed in 1914, so he was one of the longer standing guys. You had Hinky Dink Michael Kenna, who some of you might have heard about. He was our first ward alderman from 1897 to 1923, had a small break, and then 1933, I think it was, to 1943. His nickname was actually given to him by Joseph Medill, who was a newspaper editor. He called him short and called him Hinky Dink as like a short name, and Hinky Dink would pretend he didn't know why he was being called Hinky Dink. Fun fact about him also, so he owned the Workmen's Exchange, was known for bribing people with lunch and beer. He got so much money, but he never owned a house. He never formally rented. He would only live out of like residential hotels. And when he died, he had like 8 kids who were all fighting for his money. He had put aside like something like 10 grand to build a tomb for him. And all his kids said, nah, fuck that. Bought him an $85 tombstone and split the rest of the money between them. So he raised his kids like he would do it. Yeah, right? Now, the next one you have Bathhouse John Coughlin, who was a former bathhouse masseur. He was also a poet. Adams read some poetry on his talks before. He's an ally of Hinky Dink, and they would work together to extract bribes, to extract protection money, and do all kinds of gnarly things in the First Ward. He also owned a saloon called the Silver Dollar Saloon, and wore ostentatiously colored outfits so he would stand out in a crowd. You also had, this is one of the good figures here, you had Vina Fields, who I could not find a picture of. She was a prominent black madam. Now, she got her humble starts. She came here, was a prostitute, but she saved a lot of money really quickly, and she was able to start her own place. She was known for holding soup kitchens during the 1893 panic for her community members. She was known for donating to school. She was known for taking care of people in her neighborhood. She would not hire girls if she could not care for them adequately. So she kept up with her girls. She kept them, you know, healthy with doctors. She gave them good food, dressed them in respectable clothing, and charged a good price for the Johns to come and visit them. She took care of them. Her house was called the House of Pleasure, by the way. I know, so nice. Now, as I mentioned before, 1893, our World's Fair comes in, and the Vice District is now a tourist attraction. We had about as many visitors to the Levee District as we did the actual fairgrounds. Some people came here just for that. In 1895, we have approximately 2,000 brothels, bars, and gambling dens in the Levee District. So just that, like, couple of block area, 2,000 establishments. And in 1897, we get our first bans on street prostitution implemented. So we can no longer have people asking, like, hey, do you want to buy some titty on the side of the street? Now, May 15th, 1900, the Chicago Vice Commissioner begins his campaign against prostitution because at this point, people are really scared of this concept called white slavery, or in other words, the sex slave trade. This is another form of human trafficking, and for some reason, there were a lot of people who were like, oh my God, white women everywhere are getting snatched up and thrown into slavery. It was not nearly as big as a lot of people made it out to be. There was a healthy amount, but it wasn't like you walked out your front door and you got black bagged and taken to a brothel, which is what a lot of people thought was the case at this point. So there were like national campaigns against human trafficking in this manner, but what they weren't doing was going after the people who were actually doing the human trafficking. Much like today, they were penalizing the victims because they were just as complicit by letting somebody, you know, handle them as the people who took them off the street. So now Christian purity movements are getting really big. The clean living movements are getting big. Temperance movement is getting big. And it's all about trying to please God and be as good a Christian as you can. And they are forcing a lot of big cities, including Chicago, to start implementing and enforcing laws against prostitution. We also see them cracking down on things like drinking and gambling and other immoral activities. I know, it sounds like my birthday. So June 25th, 1910, we have the Mann Act. Now, the Mann Act was actually an act against human trafficking, but some of the more funny ways that I've seen it handled in courts is that women who were getting tricked into sleeping with their prospective fiancés and then the guy backing out, saying, oh, well, he took me over the state line for a vacation and he had sex with me, and so that's human trafficking, so you need to either make him like marry me or pay me restitutions. So I saw a lot of that when I was doing my research, which I thought was a great use of law. But basically what this says is that you cannot bring a person, or if you are a prostitute yourself, you cannot go across state lines in order to perform your sexual acts. You had to, live in the place that you're at and do them there. So this was a measure to try and cut down on human trafficking, because they're like, well, if there's a law against moving sex workers across state lines, clearly the black market's gonna follow, right? No. Now, between 1900 and 1911, there's some really major protests against the Levee District performed. We have, in 1908, the health commissioner of Chicago asks city council members to pass ordinances that require hospitals and clinics to report cases of venereal disease, which included names. And thankfully, our hospital people at the time said, fuck that. We will not do it if you force us to put names down. But they were already reporting venereal diseases in the same reports as you'd get like tuberculosis and cholera and dysentery, all those other, Oregon Trail diseases. But just like, those people, they didn't have names attached to their disease. They just reported the number of cases each hospital saw. So they agreed to only do that reporting if there were no names attached. So good on them. Now, in 1909, we have Police Chief Stewart, who bans the sale of booze in brothels. Nobody follows this. So if you didn't grease the right palms, you were going to get smacked for selling booze in the wrong place. But if you bribed the right hand, you would, you don't see an upset in your business. And this especially doesn't apply to people like the Everleigh Club, who we'll talk about in a minute. These higher end places, they don't have to follow the same rules as the rest of us. 1910, we see prostitutes being taken into court for the first time for being diseased, for having syphilis, for having gonorrhea, things like that. And they are being put in jail as a public safety hazard, and they are to remain in jail until they are cured. Now, for things like syphilis, this means until you are dead, because there was no antibiotics, there was no penicillin, there was no way to adequately treat a person so they would get rid of their syphilis. So we start seeing that for the first time in 1910. And this same year, the American Public Health Association discusses prostitution as a public health and safety matter with the military in a negative light. Now, it's important to note that even though they are blaming prostitutes for all of their soldiers getting VD, they are still being led by people who are in these purity movements, so they are not putting condoms in the sanitary packets that they would give to soldiers. So, and like a lot of military people are like, you're putting like 800 men in a barrack and you don't want them to butt fuck each other? Why don't we have brothels? I don't know. Seems like a good idea to me. And on top of that, they're not giving them prophylactics, which had been in production for a while. Basically, as far as the Christian purity movement went, if you kept it in your pants, you wouldn't have a problem. And we've now seen with abstinence-only education how well that works. Right? Yeah, I went to Catholic school. Ask me how good my sex education was. It was not. All right. Now, October 18th, 1909, Gypsy Smith, who was a British evangelical and a purity movement activist, and he also called himself Gypsy because he was Romani. He leads a anti-white slavery parade through the Levee district. And there were pictures of this. There were like 300 people in his parade. They had a cart that was playing gospel music, and they're all carrying banners and flags and stuff about how sinful you're all being. And everybody in the district just kind of poked their head out and went, huh, that's interesting. I'm going to go back to my sin. And they kind of disregarded it, but there were a bunch of really cool pictures about it. And the fact that nobody came out to join them, they didn't convert anybody through the power of gospel music and prayer. They considered this to be actually a win because it showed how degraded and how depraved these people were. So they would use that as ammunition to get more and more laws passed. Now, 1912, the majority of prostitution, it has been run out of the Levee district and into the suburbs. Now, at this point, we're going to talk about the Everleigh Club because they're one of the most well-known, but they are such a cool place to discuss. So the Everleigh Club was owned and operated by Ada and Mina Everleigh. They were sisters. They were born Ada February 15th, 1864, and Mina July 13th, 1866. And their original name was Sims. So Ada and Mina Sims. And they were born in Greene County, Virginia. Now, early on in life, their early life is not well known to us because they wrote their own biography and filled it full of lies. They like to tell people that they were debutantes who had come into the life because all of their male relatives were dead and that's how they got their money. They inherited all their money and decided to be madams. not the case. We do know that their family was at one point well off, but then the Civil War happened, and so they were not well off because they were plantation owners, and plantation owners got what they got. And so they had to kind of scramble for money, and these two sisters actually decided to be actresses, and so they joined an acting troupe, and then their acting troupe dumped them off in Omaha, Nebraska, as one does. They changed their last name from Sims to Everly, and they were inspired to change their name because their grandmother had always signed her letters, Everly yours. So that's a really nice nod to grandma. And they also decided that that was a much more elegant sounding name than Sims. In 1895, they opened their first brothel in Omaha, Nebraska, and they are very successful at this. They get so successful, actually, that they decide to open up a second location when the World's Fair comes to Omaha, Nebraska. And, or I don't know if it's the World's Fair, but there was a big exhibition fair type thing that came to Omaha, and they opened up a second location just for those patrons, which I thought was really funny. But they've decided that they've outgrown Omaha in 1898, and they are looking for greener pastures. And so they hear about a brothel owner selling her place. Her name was Evie Hankins, and she was selling her already established location in the Levee District in Chicago. They come here, check it out in 1899, decide, perfect, we're going to set up shop. So they buy the place from Effie Hankins, and then they do a complete remodel and turn what was a pretty like run-of-the-mill brothel into a luxury brothel. And by luxury, I mean luxury. We have pictures here of some of the rooms that were in this brothel. They spared no expense for opening. They already had a good chunk of money saved when they came from Omaha, and they were doing all kinds of things like putting $650 gold spittoons in their little parlors. They had a gold-plated piano that at that point cost $15,000. Today it would cost $420,000. They had china dishes to eat off of, mahogany furniture to sit on. All of the light fixtures were gold. They had elegant little tchotchkes on their mantles. They had oil paintings, fine art. They had marble statues, oriental rugs, exotic wallpaper, and most important, air conditioning. I know, they had air conditioning, right? So the beds that they had were not full, like they were not king size. They would probably land in the area of like queen today, but that's still a pretty big bed. I mean, they were really nice. There's a bedroom in one of those pictures. Now they officially opened their doors February 1st, 1900 on 2131 Dearborn Street, and they immediately become one of the most exclusive brothels in this city and one of the most infamous brothels in the country. They hired all new staff. All of the previous staff had been fired, and they hired new girls for a new experience. They called their workers butterflies, and very nice way to call them. And these girls were trained to be like courtesans. They were trained in conversation, dance, music, art, politics, literature, and they were supposed to be, like a girlfriend for the night, not just somebody to get your rocks off with. A lot of people actually came to the Everly Club just to have a glass of champagne, have dinner, and a nice conversation with a girl who looked good in a ball gown. That was actually one of their criteria for hiring these girls. They had to be of perfect health and look good in a ball gown. They had to be very hygienic. They would have a doctor come and see these girls weekly, and these doctors were actually nice. They were not, the mean poking, prodding guys. These were the guys who actually cared about their health. They were told that if they stole, they would be immediately fired. It was pretty common in some of the more cheap brothels for you to lose your wallet if you weren't paying attention to it. And so yeah, they were told not to steal. They were told, guide the conversation into something that is pleasurable, just, keep the men happy. And they looked out for their girls. If the girls were mistreated in any way, that person was not allowed back, which I think is pretty cool. And really uncommon for the time.
So the cost must have been more.
Oh yes, it was. I'm about to get to that. So these girls were also fed the same type of food that the Johns would receive, and they had 5 gourmet chefs on staff at any given time. So they had gourmet food all the time. They also were allowed to keep all of a good chunk of their money. They would make between $100 to $400 a week each girl, which was a huge increase because the average weekly wage for most women was about $5 a week. So that tells you how much of the money that these guys are spending on these girls was actually given to the girls. To actually be a person who visited this site, you had to be a member. And in order to be a member, you had to be sponsored by an existing member or personally invited by Ada or Mina. So it was a very exclusive club. They had a huge wait list, and they would actually interview these people who are coming in to spend time with the butterflies. They had a whole experience going. Like, they had an orchestra who came and played. They held parties. They would put on plays. They had both buffet and plated dinners. And of course they had sex. Now, if you decided to spend less than $100 on any visit, you were not allowed back. So that was the bare minimum that you had to spend in order to be considered a member in good standing. But the average amount spent at the Everleigh Club for any given evening was between $200 and $1,200. So that's a lot of money in the early 1900s. So now you might be asking, what would it cost to just spend time alone with one of the butterflies? Well, secluded time was $50. That is a huge markup from the 25 cents to $1 to $5 that a lot of the other brothels were charging for their girls. Champagne, if you wanted to buy a bottle of champagne in the parlors, it was $12. If you wanted to buy a bottle of champagne for just you and your secluded butterfly, it was $15. People would expect to come and get, 5-star service and really exclusive, like rare vintage wines and champagnes. You'd get all kinds of things like truffles and oysters brought in from the coasts. And some people literally just did come for the food and just to hang out with some pretty girls. Now, the sisters had two different roles that they played in this brothel. Ada was quieter, and she had more of a mind for business than mingling. So she's the one who took care of the books, made sure everybody was fed and clothed, make sure everybody was doing okay. She paid all the bills. Mina was the outgoing sister, and she was going to be the one who's on the floor every night, making sure everybody was getting what they needed, making sure everybody was having a good time, and making sure everybody was safe. And she's also the one who entertained their most important guests. Now, the club was responsible for some fun little phrases that we know today. There was a phrase that some people would say if they were going to the Everleigh Club. They were saying they were going to get Everlaid, which today has translated into get laid. There was a Chinese woman who worked there named Butterfly Susie Poontang, and she is one of the top 3 origin people that we believe originated the term poon or poontang for pussy. Prince Henry, he visited from Prussia in 1902, and he came specifically. He was here picking up a boat for his brother, but he came to Chicago specifically because he had heard of the Everleigh Club and he wanted to see what was going on, what the hype was about. So they held a bacchanalia ball for him. And it was like a sold-out affair. Only him and his friends and the girls and him partied all night. And in the midst of all this frolicking, one of the gals, kicked her foot up, lost her shoe, and one of the members in his party poured champagne into the shoe and drank it out of the shoe. So if you've ever seen a reference to drinking champagne out of a shoe, you have, Prince Henry of Prussia to thank. So that's just a couple of the things that, the Everleigh Club had inspired. Now, they managed to actually avoid too much scandal and too much issues with the cops while they were in business until about 1911. And at that point, we start getting, specifically Vic Shaw had it out for the Everleigh Club, and she was putting all kinds of nasty dirt on them. But the death of Marshall Field Jr. was a big one. And by that point, people had had enough. They were like, well, if even the really fancy whorehouse can, end up, with somebody dead, who do we trust? And so finally, Mayor Carter Harrison was pushed into this decision to close the Everleigh Club. October 24th, 1911, Carter Harrison orders the club to close. And they had been expecting this for a while. So they'd been stocking up for a rainy day. And they decided, you know what the hell? Let's have one more party. They invited all the members who could come, who could get there within 24 hours. They held this huge blowout ball. Both sisters were in attendance. And there were a lot of people who were really upset that this club was closing. It was a very well-respected gentleman's club. But The girls walked around, and Ada and Mina in particular were like, don't be sad. We had a good run. We had a good time. We thank you for your patronage. And made sure everybody was having a good, nostalgic time, not just crying into their beer. And Ada and Mina kept everything upbeat. They kept everybody from getting arrested. The cops actually watched from outside at various points throughout the night, and people were coming and going all night. But nobody got stopped, nobody got arrested, and the next morning, October 25th, they officially closed their doors, and the sisters retired to the tune of millions of dollars in their bank account. So they retired very rich. And within a couple of years, all the known brothels in the Levy District had moved out of Chicago and had moved out to the suburbs where it was easier to grease palms, where the heat was a little less hot out there. Cicero in particular was a good one to get a prostitute from if you were into that kind of thing. Now that brings us to the 20th century and 21st century. Prostitution does not end even if it's criminalized. Yet attitudes still remain mostly negative because of social stigma and religion. These are two really big factors that make people go, ugh, if you say you have an OnlyFans. People have attempted to help the human trafficking crisis and help make society safer by criminalizing prostitution and penalizing people who, break the law. Unfortunately, this means that a lot of women who, now let's be fair, there are a lot of male prostitutes out there, but at the heart of this is that the majority of prostitutes are women, and they are the ones who see the biggest backlash. They're the ones who see the biggest penalizations for any kind of involvement in the sex industry. And people have tried to help. They've tried to tackle this issue, particularly when it comes to forced sex work and human trafficking. But what they are doing, they are taking accounts from people who are extremely traumatized, and they're taking accounts from people who are coming at it from an already biased and religious standpoint, for the most part. And they are saying that sex workers are the ones putting people at risk. They are not listening to people who are in the sex industry actively, and they are not listening to what they say would help them. Now, I'm going to say some stuff that's a little controversial here, so come at me if you like. But 1921, we have the International Convention for Suppression of the Traffic of Women and Children. This is signed into, an agreement by the League of Nations. This act was intended to stop women and children who were caught up in the aftermath of World War I from getting picked up by nasty people, taken to a country where they don't know the language, and being forced into sex slavery. What actually ended up happening is people who were, engaged in the sex industry on their own free will were getting criminalized as if they were the ones who sold people into sex slavery. Post-World War II, we have more human trafficking in all the chaos that happened, and more of the persecution is ramping up. And we also see much more criminalization of sex work across the entire world. December 2nd, 1949, the UN General Assembly approves the act that was signed by the League of Nations in 1921. And this is where the controversial opinion comes in. I say that they are actually responsible for the current black market in human trafficking. Yeah. So my reasoning for this is that they will prosecute not just the human traffickers, but the victims as well. There's a lot of cases. You might have seen Centoya Brown at some point. Might have seen her story. Centoya Brown was a teenager who was, kidnapped and forced into sex work as like a young teenager. She killed her pimp at the age of 14 and then was thrown into jail for the next 20 years. Had at one point faced the death penalty. That's what they're doing with a lot of the sex workers who get caught up in this. Even if they are, if they're human trafficked or if they're voluntary. You have a lot of people who are going after them as if they are criminals for providing a service. They are also not putting any kind of protections in for anybody who wants to escape sex slavery. They are not providing any resources to help people get out of that lifetime. All they're really doing is telling people you shouldn't be doing that thing and maybe go look at an advocacy group. The UN in particular is not doing much. So I say that they've actually contributed to it quite a bit by saying, yeah, let's criminalize everything with no regulations, no help from law enforcement, and no help from any kind of health services, and expect the black market to go away. So that's my opinion. I'd love to hear yours later. Now, this comes into effect July 25th, 1951, abolishing all regulation in any country that subscribes to this particular act that the UN has done. And since then, there have been a variety of ways to combat prostitution. There's two big ones that I wanted to address. The first one is the pretty run-of-the-mill standard model is that everybody caught doing it, they're the ones who get in trouble, they get thrown in jail. Johns generally get less time than prostitutes do. The other model is the Swedish model. Now, the Swedish model says that if you are a sex worker, you are never going to be prosecuted by the government or by law enforcement. However, your clients will be. So this hurts not only the people who are going to a sex worker, but the sex workers themselves, because it makes their industry more difficult to obtain. Now, in the United States, it is illegal in all 50 states except for 10 counties in Nevada, and it is not Las Vegas County. Las Vegas County has specifically said that they do not have it legalized there, but just outside of Las Vegas County is where it all is. So if that's what you're looking for, go to Vegas. And that brings us to today. That brings us to the end of prostitution in Chicago. Thank you. Any questions?
Question.
Sure.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
What do they do for birth control?
Good question. So there have been many versions of birth control throughout the years. Some really common ones are abortifacient teas, which you could drink that cause menstruation and hopefully, bleed the baby out. There are tortoise shells, which it's like a diaphragm made out of tortoise shell. That was pretty common up until the age that vulcanized rubber was pretty common. You did have condoms as early as the Renaissance era. They were made out of sheepskin, but mostly were made to prevent STD transfer, not pregnancy, so people could still get pregnant off of those because, fun fact, a sheep colon tied with a ribbon isn't going to be a good, effective condom. Just, but yeah, those are a couple of the, and then you also had people.
Tell me.
But yeah, that's some of the methods of birth control available to people until the 1960s with hormonal birth control, thanks to Catherine Dexter McCormick, who was my subject last year. Woo! Until she made it possible for every woman to have access to hormonal birth control. There's some more gruesome ones if you want to hear them afterwards. Internet question?
Yes, internet question. What happened to people who aged out or got sick and they couldn't continue sex work?
So the people who would age out or get sick, people who aged out would generally try to find some like low-paying wage, like working in a laundry, working in a factory, things like that. You would take whatever you could get. Some people would continue on until they couldn't, like doing things out of their own home, depending on how like tenacious you were at getting clients. And then people who got sick. People who got sick, generally, if it was something like syphilis, their brains would like turn into Swiss cheese and they'd die within a few years of being not treated. So you only had a few years to suffer. But people who had other diseases that didn't really manifest in that way, you kind of just went on with your life and you picked up a different job. Because you didn't have to expose yourself to the factory workers in order to get a job. But if they found out that you were a prostitute, you're more likely to get fired. Good question. Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if my college made this up or not, but I was always told in Chicago, since we have brothel laws, you can't have sorority houses in Chicago.
They say that in every college town.
They do say it in every college town, and that's incorrect.
Women in a house is a brothel, but you can have a fraternity.
Every college town has that same urban legend.
There are sororities here in Chicago. Go on the northwestern campus, you'll see a couple of them. Yeah, or DePaul. Is there anybody here who went to a Chicago college and was in a sorority?
Does art school count?
So how about Chicago colleges?
Yeah.
Okay, so did you guys see sororities on your campus?
I mean, they existed,
Like houses.
Yeah.
but I did not fraternize with them.
Fair enough. But yeah, no. Yeah.
74%.
The ancient Egyptians the women used crocodile dung.
Yes, ancient Egyptian women did use crocodile dung as a form of diaphragm.
Sounds awful.
And how did it work for them?
How did it work for them? Well,
Get it.
so,
Just follow the crocodile.
okay. So that's a good question first. How did they get it? So
The
crocodiles
crocodile.
crocodiles were actually a really sacred animal in ancient Egypt, and there were entire temples that just had crocodiles living in them. So you could just literally scoop it up from the floor, and then they would be sold. Sorry?
And then do what?
Oh, so then, well, once you have it, roll it into a little ball, you shove it up your hoo-ha, and hopefully you don't get pregnant. Yeah, it's a real technical term. And that, yes, yeast infections were common. It was not...
Sepsis.
Yeah, no. You weren't supposed to keep that in forever. You were supposed to, it's like a one and done deal. And super uncomfortable. I'd honestly just go with the pull-out method if that was my option. Like crocodile dung or pull-out method, I'll take the gamble. And ancient Egyptians also, they would, they had a form of pregnancy test, actually. They would, and this was also used in the brothels, although they weren't nearly as widespread as they were in ancient Rome and ancient Greece. But brothels and doctors actually would have like plates of soil, and they would put like barley seeds in there, and if you peed on it and the barley sprouted, you were pregnant. It was about 70% accurate, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, 70% accurate.
I've been figuring this out for a very
Yeah, yeah.
So I was gonna say, the Evans sisters sounded like they were very progressive, and they created a lot of things that we still use today, because the champagne room and the food strip clubs today now to get people in. So are they ever given credit for, you know?
I think
all the things that-
I think nowadays they are, but back in the day when it was still very like hush hush shameful to like even mention it, not so much. Now we know better. Now there are people who are like, hey, did you want to hear about some sex history? Because sex sells. By the way, donate to Chicago for Chicagoans.
Yeah.
attended lecture of the year, and it's about sex.
Yeah, literally.
Shocking.
But yeah, no.
Farms?
They would they get their due now, not so much in the previous generations. Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm interested in the origin of red light in red light districts.
So there's a
And
couple.
also the red light that's in front of a speakeasy. You have to read
So there are a couple of origin stories for that. Some people think that it is red lanterns in China or red lanterns in Southeast Asia, where there's a lot of port towns. Some say that the red light district was actually born in the Netherlands because they would put out red lanterns. There's no one definitive like origin. They all seem to kind of crop up at about the same time. But generally it's because red lights turned on at these places meant you were open for business. And then they just called them red light districts because that's where all the red lights are on for business. Yeah. Yeah.
So, two-part question. Number one, you know, you've done a lot of research on this. You see the political climate and everything. Do you think that like legal brothels / prostitution is done in Chicago? Do you think it's going to come back? And number two, is there a responsible way?
Who do I call?
Next door.
Is there a
Where can I sign
responsible way to do it that doesn't encourage things like, you know?
So I feel very similarly about prostitution as I do about decriminalization of like hard drugs. If you criminalize it, you have now made a market for bad people to make bad money. And the people who are going into this industry, like say you're an OnlyFans person or you know you're a cam person, and you know you're making your extra money, that's legal because you're not touching another person's junk, you know, in like on the streets or in a brothel. It doesn't matter if you have a partner, that's considered pornography, which is considered filmography, which is art. It's a weird like gray area. But I think that if you decriminalize it and you make it okay for sex workers to, you know, go to the hospital and say, hey, I was raped by a client. Or if you make that okay for them to go to the police and actually be heard with respect, and that person, you know, the John who hurt her will be prosecuted in a, you know, effective way, I think that a lot of the human trafficking goes down. And not all of it, there's always going to be a black market, but I think a lot of that goes down. Now, as for, is it coming back to Chicago? It's still here. Yeah, no, there are still prostitutes here. There's actually a lot of them over by Midway. Very recently, there was actually a lot of community complaints about like condoms being left on the side of the street. And I think that is partly because of criminalization. These girls have to pick up their people on the side of the road, do their thing really quick in the car, and get out before a cop comes to get them. I think that it would be healthier and safer for everybody, public included, if it was decriminalized. I don't think that it's coming back unless we realize that sex work is real work, and that needs to happen in a legislative space, not just our space.
So, kind of a nerd here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all are.
You
Anyway,
know.
I know, right? Okay. So, I just like, all my things like war brings about medical, advances, right?
Yeah.
So, my question is with STDs, prostitution, all this, were any medical advances like directly out of treating prostitutes for STDs and all that kind of thing, or was it secondary?
So there is some of, huh?
Say the question back.
Say the question back.
So the question was there any medical advances made from the treatment of prostitutes for things like STDs? As far as I'm aware, there are, but it's very much in the same case as, what's the name of the woman with the immortal cells? They're all, thank you. So it's in a similar vein. You're getting all of this DNA, you're getting all of this research from women who didn't consent. And it's very much like the guy who invented gynecology, who was experimenting on black enslaved women. It comes at a price. These people are being treated for something that they can't help, and they were not talked about beforehand before they were put into books. I don't know of any actual specifics. I don't have any specific names, but it wouldn't surprise me if there were, because women have been preyed upon in the medical field for a very, very, very long time. So,
quick internet question.
Yeah.
What happens if you got pregnant?
What happens if you got pregnant? So, in some cases, you would try to abort. If you could not abort for whatever reason, if it didn't take, you chose not to, there were two really big there's three big outcomes. First one is you kill the baby right away once it comes out. Infanticide was very, very common. In fact, in places like Israel and in places throughout the Roman Empire, when you find a big, pit of baby bones, chances are there was a brothel next door. So that's option one. Option two, if it is a girl child, it is kept, and she is trained from birth to be a prostitute. Because, you can't beat free for employed, right? So they were very practical. If it was a girl, they were kept. If they chose to not keep a girl child, or if it was a boy child, chances are they would be adopted out. And generally what that would mean is that these kids would go into baby farms, or they would go into workhouses, or they would be, sent off to be enslaved. It is not a happy outcome. But those are the three major outcomes that you would have if you had a kid while being a prostitute.
We have time for 2 more questions.
All right. Oh, back here.
I just want to know what the address of the Everlake Club was.
The address of the Everlake Club was 2131 Dearborn. It was in Sussex. It's south.
It no longer
Yeah.
exists.
Yeah, no, the building was torn down after a fire.
This street also no longer exists.
It's been renamed.
There's an old folks home there now.
So I can't get a membership.
Uh, I'll answer your question later, Anthony.
You
What?
join the old folks home.
So you know how we see on TV and movies modern day madams. You know what I mean? High class madams and that whole aspect of the brothel. Is there a lot of that today, Kurt? Are you aware?
So I'm not aware of any really big internet madams. I'm not what I am aware of is from my own friends' experiences who run their own shops. I'm not giving names. A lot of people are independent these days. A lot of people don't work for other people because the chances of you getting screwed out of your hard-earned money is really high if you entrust that to someone else. There are people, especially in Nevada though right now, because Nevada is the only place that has it legalized. Those brothels actually do pride themselves on being very safe places, and the people, both men and women who work there, feel very safe because it is so highly watched and so highly regulated in those counties. So I think if we had a decriminalization movement and brothels came back and it was regulated and watched over in the same manner for quality assurance and for safety, I think you'd see more of that. Really what we see right now is a lot of people who are independent workers who make a shit ton of money if they do very well. It's very hard to get to a point where you make really good money but the people who make good money make good money.
And most of it is internet.
Was she in?
Yeah.
Was she Nevada?
Yes, she was Heidi Life, right?
No,
Life.
I thought she was
Sorry.
California.
Yeah, I thought it
I honestly don't know.
she was arrested and
Yeah, I have no. Well, that is all the time I have. If you want to ask me questions afterwards, please feel free to do so. I will be here for a while. I'm going to turn it over to Patty. Please donate to your good hosts and tip your bartender. Hi. I'm muted. And I think my lipstick has washed off.
Okay. So I just want to mention, if you guys are interested in this topic, there's 2 great books you can pick up from your local Chicago Public Library. First one, Sin in the Second City. Very well researched, goes in quite a bit of depth about the Everleys, especially analyzing what lies they had in their biography and how they align with the truth. Sin in the Second City, really good read about Chicago's Vice District, at least the one that we're talking about tonight. And the other one you might be interested in, a great book I picked up a little while ago called Eve's Herbs. Like Eve's herbs, like basil, which goes through a history of abortion and birth control methods in the West, from like way antiquity all the way up to more modern methods. It's a very academic read, but I have found it very interesting because it really does go to show you that like women figured it out. Like historically, if you did not want to be pregnant, you're gonna figure it out. And that's still true today, which is why it's really important to protect women's reproductive rights and their rights to choose, et cetera, et cetera. Okay.
don't get me started.
Yeah, right.
That could be a whole separate talk.
Right, that could be a whole separate talk, but 2 great books if you want to read a little bit more on this topic or you're really fascinated by how like Roman women kept themselves from getting pregnant. There's a lot of really interesting research done on it. And some plants that they use like literally were harvested till extinction, which is super fascinating because obviously if it works really well to not get you pregnant, you're going to use all of it. Lastly, I want to again thank Mandy. I want to thank Oscar in the back, our bartender. Please make a donation tonight if you can. We have all these great QR codes. Olivia in the back there has a little jar of money. You can give her money. Please give it up for our volunteers. We could not do this without our entirely volunteer staff. It is not just me. We have Hayward doing video. We got Lisa tonight and Olivia helping us out. Anthony works behind the scenes. We got a lot of great people involved in our organization. We're all volunteer run, so we really appreciate your support. And please make sure next week we have Adam Seltzer here. He's going to be, shut up. He'll be talking all about vice districts that weren't the red light district. So getting into some really fun ones there. And then if you haven't already signed up, tickets have been selling out really fast for these events. You might have noticed. 2 weeks from tonight, we have Giovina coming here to talk to us about Dunning hospitals as well as the Municipal Tuberculosis Sanitarium. So when you got one of those Oregon Trail diseases, where did you go? You can sign up for that starting tonight. All of our registration opens 2 weeks in advance. So mark your little calendars, 9 a.m., 2 weeks out. Grab your tickets, get here early. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next week.